Welcome back to WPPM LP Philadelphia, People Powered Media, 106.5 FM in Philadelphia. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the What's Next radio show on WPPM and the Ray's Talk Show for our podcast listeners. Thank you again so much. We break down on this program the present and future of politics and the latest headlines. If you want to know what's happening in 6 months, listen to us now. Listen to WPPM online at phillycam.org/listen. In the TuneIn app, you can catch Ray's Talk Show. You know, y'all can catch Ray's Talk Show anywhere. You download a podcast, SoundCloud, Stitcher, everywhere you download a podcast. On this frigid edition of the show, we will provide you a take on this week's news headlines, the premiere of the Stacking 20 segment. I got some in my back pocket right now, and got to talk about the Fyre Festival. And also, in honor of one of the great R&B singers, who just passed, James Ingram, I'm going to do a poetic reading of some of my favorite lyrics from that man and his legacy. So a very entertaining edition of Ray's Talk Show. My co-host, Yaya Rivera, is handling some personal business. Give Yaya our best. And we're going to have some, she's going to be back very soon, as well as some great guests we're going to have in February. Of course, this is the eve of Black History Month, so definitely have a few episodes dedicated to the legacy of not only what that means in 2019, but also intersectionality of the Afro-Latino community. And this episode is also dedicated to the actor Jussie Smollett, who was the victim of a vicious hate crime over the weekend in Chicago. Our prayers are with you, Jussie, and we'll stay vigilant that justice will be served for that horrific incident, which was terrible. So on this episode of Ray's Talk Show, we're going to talk later in the show about, in our Stacking 20 segment, about the CEO of Starbucks getting into the mix. And again, we're going to talk about some of the headlines later in the show. But first, I wanted to discuss identity, what it means to have our place in this country. If people didn't see it, legendary, I mean, you're talking about a Mount Rushmore level journalist and television news personality, Tom Brokaw, really made some provocative statements. I'm just going to read them for you on Meet the Press this Sunday. And this was in the context of talking about the immigration discussion, which is, of course, about undocumented immigration, right? So we go from undocumented immigration to a discussion that goes to this direction on national television. Quote from Tom Brokaw, I also happen to believe that the Hispanics should work harder at assimilation. That's one of the things I've been saying for a long time. They have to make sure all their kids are learning and speaking English, and that's going to take outreach on their part. So let's get to the facts before we get to my commentary on the situation. And again, I appreciate everyone joining us. Juan, a lot of Juans. What's two Latinos playing basketball one-on-one? And of course, my wonderful wife, Michelle, and I'm sure a couple of my boys are watching as well. So let's get to the facts. The first fact is that this is not really an issue from a data perspective. The vast majority of us are born here. So presumably, as U.S.-born American citizens, that sort of bridges the language curve, and all educational K through 12 statistics bear that out, that our language access is comparable to other ethnic groups in similar histories. And all the data tells us that Latinos learn English and, at some level culturally assimilate as fast as anybody else. So it's always interesting how, certain groups, ethnicities are celebrated, and others are questioned as part of their identity as Americans. And so the reality is that it was a good thing in a sense that Tom Brokaw said this, because it really illuminated for many people what I've been saying and we've been saying on Ray's Talk Show for years. Again, you want to know what's going to happen in the future? You come here. How many of y'all didn't know what a podcast was when I started talking about it 5.5 years ago and saying this was the future? And look at us now. So let's listen to the real. So what I've also been saying on the show for many years is that this debate about this border wall and this made-up border crisis is not really about undocumented immigration, which is an issue, but not a significant problem in a federal policy sense. It's certainly not a crisis. It really is about our identity and our place in our country. And why are Latinos being viewed as foreign when a big, sizable geographic chunk of this country was Mexico, annexed from Mexico? We literally have a colony of 4 million American citizens that are Spanish-speaking, Puerto Rico, and an incredibly long history of being Americans. And so the other thing he said was very illuminative, if people saw that, is that he also talked about how he basically said, let me look it up here, what exactly he said, but essentially he said, I don't want brown babies, or he didn't, let me be correct. He said, you going to join me, Vanessa? Okay, awesome. All right, you let me know when you're ready, my friend. It's already on. My executive producer is going to join me. I'm so happy. Got a lot going on here today. So, all right. So the other thing about this is that, so basically, Tom Brokaw said he hears from people in his network that they're concerned about not having, they're not sure, quote unquote, if they want to have brown grandbabies. And there's a concern about the interracial relationships that are coming out of our increased presence in this country. On some level, we can't have it both ways, can we? So you can't have an issue with us not being American or trying to be American, but also saying you don't want us to be too close and so American that we're interacting with each other. Are you ready, Vanessa?
I'm ready.
Vanessa Ramirez Graber, the queen bee of community radio. How are you today, Vanessa?
I'm doing well. It's a bit cold out there, but
a bit cold. That's a bit of an underselling of this.
Yeah, we're hanging in there.
It is cold. So, Vanessa, thank you for joining the show. We're talking about, I'm sure you saw Tom Brokaw's comments on Meet the Press. And so why don't you just start with sharing your initial thoughts about when you heard it and how you've been stewing on it the last few days.
Okay, so I have a lot to say about this. The first thing is I don't think white people have any right to tell people of color or Latinos how they should be assimilating or integrating into a country, especially since many states in the United States, we're part of Mexico. At first, it's like they were here for a long time. Indigenous people were here for a long time. I don't think they have a right to tell people how to assimilate into our quote unquote culture or our country. So that's the first thing. And also, if you look historically, assimilation was forced on people in a lot of ways, forbidding people to practice their religion. If you look historically about colonization and what was stripped away from the indigenous people, they weren't allowed to practice their religion. They weren't allowed to speak in their language. They weren't allowed to sing their songs, have their dances. A lot of those things were stripped and they were forced into becoming Christians. This also happened in Europe and other countries, with the Ottoman Empire, right? They made people convert to Islam, change their names. Again, even in communist countries where people weren't allowed to practice religion, forced assimilation can be really dangerous. And there's examples of that all over the world throughout history. So for somebody as intelligent as Tom Brokaw to make those statements, it's kind of like a really weird thing coming from a journalist. You would expect somebody who doesn't have the benefit or privilege of higher education, who's not a respected, known journalist, to make very ignorant, stupid statements like that.
Well, you bring up a couple things, Vanessa. One is that when you talk about assimilation, one of the interesting conversations that I saw online after the show was a lot of Latinos recounting their stories about how their parents and their grandparents, they lived in societies in the United States, like in Texas and even in New York back in the days, or in California, about how they were punished if they were acting Latino and speaking Spanish. And you couldn't speak Spanish in schools. I had a former boss, Dr. Juan Andrade, that basically was put in jail for speaking Spanish to immigrant Latino kids at the time on the southern border in the early 70s. That wasn't that long ago. And so it brought up a lot of pain for people about this this misidentity. Mojados dos veces. Mexicans say you're not Latino enough in Latin America, but you're not American enough in the United States. So this really caused a lot of open wounds.
Yeah, I think too, like we think about all the things people do to fit in here. They change their names. So, a lot of international students will have an American name because there's difficulty in pronouncing their names, or there's a resistance to learning how to pronounce their names properly. So they develop like an American identity. People then will stop eating their ethnic foods and eat our foods. They'll dress differently. People even bleach their skin color to make themselves lighter. They use relaxers. And people go through a lot to quote unquote assimilate. And I think the diversity in our country is what makes it beautiful, is what makes people want to come here, the melting pot. Somebody made a comment about a programmer on our station and asked him, I couldn't believe you're on the radio because of your accent. And he said, I don't hear that in Philly radio anywhere. Nobody talks with an accent. So I thought that was really surprising that you're on the radio talking like that, because English is not his first language. And I said, well, that's the great thing about WPPM. We got a lot of different people with accents from all around the world.
That's right.
We got Irish accents. We have Spanish accents from many different countries. We have UK accents, Jamaican accents. And in Philadelphia, we have a large international immigrant community, and we deal with people with accents every single day. So why wouldn't that be reflected in our community radio, right? And our motto is radio that sounds like Philadelphia. So no, on our station, we don't assimilate. We don't change our accents. We sound like we're from Philly or North Philly or South Jersey or wherever we're from. And we're proud of that. And I think that people should pride themselves on being bicultural, on being able to speak multiple languages. If you go to Europe or Africa, people are bilingual, trilingual. There's signs in many different languages. People learn how to speak different languages. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And when you come out of that environment and come here and they're like, speak English, it's so backwards. It's not progressive at all. And I don't have children, but if I did, I would want them to speak English, Spanish, and maybe another language like Arabic or French or Chinese. Like, I don't see the harm in being able to communicate in different languages. And if we look at like semiotics, right, which is like the study of like language and symbols, like language is just one of the ways that we communicate. It's signs and symbols, right? I communicate with my hands right now. We communicate with music. We communicate it with images. And to put restrictions on the ways that people communicate, it just seems like a really backwards way of thinking. And then finally, like his statements were racist. Right?
Yeah.
They were racist. They're based in privilege and white supremacist ideology. And for him to say it so carelessly and callously without thinking about the impacts that will have on how people feel, how that adds to further racism and stereotyping of people, and how this actually translates into microaggressions and violence that's committed to people on a daily basis. I think we're kind of like seeing that right now. There's like a controversy with Kevin Hart, who was trying to like post a reaction about some of the about the actor from Empire.
Yeah, Jussie Smollett. Yeah.
Right, who he was assaulted and allegedly he was profiled because he is gay, and people were reacting to Kevin Hart and saying, well, this is why your jokes are problematic, because these are the effects of that. These are the impacts of this kinds of thinking, of this kind of joking. These statements have real effects on people's everyday lives, and that's why people were holding you accountable. And I feel the same way when it comes with Brokaw statements. Like, these statements have real effects in people's everyday lives, and he's somebody with a big platform with a lot of influence, and he really just was not thinking about those effects, and he wasn't careful about how he worded his opinion, etc. And when you have a platform like that, when you're a celebrity, you have to think before you speak.
No, and the other part of it, to me, it talks about, the interesting thing was the reaction of his colleagues at NBC, and many of them are considered progressive journalists, or certainly not ignorant people that are worldly. And, they just wanted to defend him. There wasn't a lot of, they said, yeah, maybe what he said was messed up, or we feel bad if Latinos feel bad. All of it was very weak and mamby-pamby. And what was so frustrating about that, saying that, you're going to pick on this guy, one statement over his career. Nobody's saying gets fired. Nobody's saying go to prison. We just want to be listened to. And it was so interesting how little listening anyone, whether it's NBC, Brokaw, his defenders, the media coverage, nobody seemed to want to listen to our perspective on it. So it's even so frustrating because it's not even about them acknowledging that he was wrong. They wouldn't even refuse to listen to our perspective on it. And that speaks to the lack of diversity in corporate media.
Yeah, I think it's very sad that even in Philadelphia, we have a lot of, because, we're Boricua, we're Puerto Rican. There's a lot of people that don't know anything about Puerto Rico. They don't know about the history. They don't know about the culture in Puerto Rico. They don't speak Spanish. They don't know the customs and traditions. And that's because of assimilation, right? And maybe it's not even their fault. It's because of the neighborhood or the schools that they were in. And I think
it's about this kind of attitude,
right?
If this is the reaction we're going to get for speaking another language or what have you,
Yeah, and there's also like a lot of segregation within communities too. Mm-hmm. I think there was a time in the United States when there was a very real fear to pass on your culture and your language to your children. And that's why they gave them American names. And that's why they didn't speak Spanish in the home. And they encouraged them to learn English. And what happens is it whitewashes your culture, right? And culture is passed on through generations. And language is a huge part of that. And I'm offended. I know that people always are like, oh, everyone's so offended all these days. Well, you know what? I'm offended. You're going to have to deal with it. And it's my feelings. And I feel a type of way about these people like Tom Brokaw getting the opportunities in journalism and these newsrooms that are controlled by people like him, and people like us don't have access. And those are the messages that they're putting out there on these big platforms with these big salaries, with these big media companies. It's unfair.
There you go. And we're going to take a break. But before we do, and we're going to get into our Stacking 20 segment after this, I want to, Vanessa, I don't think you heard this. Obviously, of course, we're all sad that the R&B legend, James Ingram, passed away over the weekend. He was only 66. And so in honor of him, I'm reading some lyrics from some of my favorite James Ingram songs, and very briefly, from the classic 100 Ways. Oh, love her now. 100 ways. Yay. You got to love her today. Find 100 ways. And I wanted to mention that with Vanessa because oftentimes us guys, we think as long as the basics are taken care of, we go to work, we're nice, we do the basic things at home, 5 or 6 ways to love, that's enough. No, guys, we got to do the little things too. We got to get up early and make breakfast on Saturday. We got to, send something to the job when they're not expecting it. The bottom line is, the loved ones in our life deserve at least 100 ways to be loved. So thank you, James, for that one. And when we come back, we're going to be stacking 20s, Vanessa.
All right, 100 Ways by James Ingram.
Oh, awesome.
We'll be right back.
Compliment what she does. Send her roses just because. If it's violin she loves, let them play. Dedicate her favorite song and hold her closer all night long. Love her today. Find 100 ways.
Welcome back to WPPM LP Philadelphia, People Power Media, 106.5 FM. And if you're out in Philly, you can always check us out anytime at phillycam.org/listen or the TuneIn app. And, of course, Ray's Latino Talk podcast. You can catch us anywhere. I mean, I'm on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, anywhere you can download a podcast. And I'm so happy that we were able to squeeze in some brief moments with the executive director of of course, the executive producer of Ray's Talk Show and the queen bee of the mothership here at WPPMLP Philadelphia. How's my probationary period, Vanessa, going here at WPPM? Is it going okay? Am I doing...
Ray's on really thin ice these days.
I know.
No, I'm kidding.
That's obvious.
You're doing great.
Oh, I appreciate you, Vanessa. Thank you for the opportunity.
We love having the Latino perspective here. We have, again, people of all races, all ethnicities from all parts of the city in South Jersey, and I think it's a beautiful thing to have a variety of different voices and perspectives commenting on all these things that are happening currently in our community. And it's nice to have that real talk, right?
We're keeping it real. And like I said earlier on the show, and Vanessa's good about pumping me up. She goes, you got to own what you're doing. And I often say this, that if you want to know what's going to happen in 6 months, listen to us, because between the people we bring to the table and our analysis, we know what we're talking about. Got to give a shout out to one of our great supporters, Madeline Villanueva, always checking us out. I'm actually wearing Andy Abaladeo's gear here, the Shooters Club. So, Andy, I expect some swag for this little hookup, but that's another story. So on this segment of the show, we did want to hold your caramel frappuccinos close, because we got to talk, Vanessa, about the latest entry into the presidential fray. CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz. And this is going to be a segment on the show when we talk about the 2020 election. Stacking 20s. Vanessa, when you heard this man go on TV and talk about wanting to run as an independent centrist, someone that mathematically could totally screw up this election cycle, how did you feel?
I honestly I'm a supporter of third and independent parties, and I don't want to set your listeners, but I have voted frequently for third and independent parties in the past.
There's nothing wrong with that,
because I felt that
Rosa Clemente ran with the Green Party.
That's right.
Rosa's our girl. No, there's nothing wrong. But this is a special case because he has the money to really. Yeah.
So again, my
issue
is not him splitting the vote. I don't buy into any of that crap. I think that it's good to have many different candidates to choose from. I think the problem is that people feel like there's not enough candidates that represent them. There's not enough political parties. My problem with him, and the first thing that I thought of when I heard the news, was this is another billionaire trying to buy the presidency.
Yeah.
And I'm tired of billionaires.
Yeah. Well,
being in control of government and thinking they can represent us, when the reality is we know who they're there to represent.
Well, there's a couple of things with it. One is that, and he's saying, people are not reacting. They're not really reacting about you and even what you're standing for, and even the billionaire thing for the most part. We're just reacting to the math. I mean, he has enough resources, and because of his privilege, will get enough attention that even if he's mediocre, there's nobody that's going to vote for Trump that's going to vote for the guy that runs Starbucks. So, that to me is, and then to me, it really is kind of like this, going back to this privilege concept, is that it's like a privileged way to do it. He doesn't want to go through the slog, because he's a Democrat essentially, to go through a slog, to campaign, to really work the retail politics that he'd have to do and compete against women and more progressive people and people of color, and really prove himself to do it. So it's just this arrogance on some level, this laziness.
I don't know. I found a lot of problems and flaws within the party system in both parties in the last election. And I can see why anybody, not just him, would not want to go through the party system. I don't think the party system is always fair. I mean, just ask Bernie Sanders about that. Again, that's not my problem. I think that he's totally, completely disconnected with communities. At least parties and people in office have some connection to their constituencies. But who is he really representing? I'm not really sure. I'm also not sure. His platform is what's his main thing? It doesn't.
I'm self-made.
But
I'm self-made.
Again, Trump was like, I'm going to drain the swamp, right? I'm an outsider. And Bernie Sanders was like, let's get money out of politics. And Clinton was like, I bring experience and I'm the most qualified. And I've been in politics. I know how to run the government. What's his thing? What's his
This man invented the caramel frappuccino. Really, it really is about this to Trump's point, right? It's like to your point about comparing to Trump. It's like it is very similar in a sense, right? Because it's like I did this amazing thing, so trust me.
He also gentrified a lot of communities. I don't think that means he should run for president.
No, and also this whole thing about basically saying I'm progressive on some things and conservative. I was like, well, okay, you claim to be friendly to poor people, minorities, and LGBT community, but then you're going to support economic policies that would be harmful to them. So it's one way or another.
Again, let's ask people that live in a gentrified community what happens when a Starbucks is opened, right? People know what that means. If Starbucks comes, you know that they're going to start developing it, the rents are going to go up, and people are going to be displaced. And I think for a long time when he was, expanding Starbucks, there was a lot of trepidation about Starbucks being on every corner. And it's globalized too. Where are they sourcing that coffee from? What about all of the plastic that they're putting into landfills? Look at all the waste that comes from Starbucks. I think there's a lot of questions we can ask about his company in terms of social responsibility that I don't think he's prepared to answer. So I'm hoping that journalists will hold his feet to the fire.
Yes,
because right now he looks at it as a major selling point. And again, I'm somebody that was involved back when there was the World Trade the WTO and the World Bank protests in Seattle. Remember that in the late 90s?
You were out there in the West Coast?
No, but I was connected to those movements, right? Which then later developed into anti-war movements, to the Occupy movement, to the Bernie movement. All these things are interconnected, but that was in Seattle. That was in his hometown.
Oh, yes, it was.
And that the globalization
it's the most gentrified
of Starbucks, was
city in
not
the country.
seen as a positive thing.
That's right.
Again, seeing these chain corporations pop up in developing countries, paying no taxes, paying low wages, it doesn't speak well to them.
Well, we will see. We will see. And before we go to our next break, the good thing is that two things. One, I'm going to give you all my prediction. And the good news is that when I heard Steve Schmidt was a part of this, I had a vision of how this was all going to go down. So I'm going to tell you how it's going to go down. My man Steve Schmidt, who ran McCain's campaign, who was so brilliant, a campaign that picked Sarah Palin to be the vice president. I mean, obviously, quite smart. Okay, we'll skip it. But so I'm predicting that Steve Schmidt went to him, capped his head up, said, "You're the man. You're the man." He's going to get all this TV publicity.
Somebody pumped him up.
Oh yeah, well, Steve Schmidt did it. He said. And we're going to go on this listening tour. And in about 6 months, he's going to tell him what I can tell you now, is that the math doesn't work for a third-party candidate. And he's going to step away. But he's going to have this ego trip for 6 months. And Steve Schmidt and his consulting firm will walk away with probably $5 to $10 million. So this is a stick up in some ways, capping the guy's head up.
I'm going to tell you, as part of a campaign that was a third party here in Philadelphia, that was a losing campaign. We knew we were going to lose. But we did it simply for the platform and the press coverage, which a lot of people don't know. We ran on a marijuana legalization platform, which, again, was so outlandish at the time that, it sparked a lot of press and controversy. And then that conversation led to the implementation of the marijuana decriminalization bill. But it started, from these protests, and we weren't getting media coverage to our protests. And then a city council special election seat became available. And we thought, why not try to run and push a really outlandish agenda, which we did, and we knew we weren't going to win, but we got that message out there. And I feel that campaigns are very effective ways to push a progressive platform and to push the other candidates further left or right. And if he did have a platform, which I said was a problem, what's the thing he's trying to push, he could capitalize on these next 6 months and the media exposure by putting something in the public sphere will then be picked up by the rest of the candidates in the debates.
No, it's true.
But I don't think he's that smart.
He has hinted at this tax piece, but to me that sounds like a slightly less progressive version of what a lot of these folks are already talking about. When we come back, we're gonna wrap up the Facebook Live element because we're actually gonna call a very special guest, James Garcia. James, thank you for your patience, and we're gonna call you in a minute and wrap it up. My another favorite James Ingram song. I don't have the heart. Let me read this note. I don't have the heart to hurt you. It's the last thing I want to do, but I don't have the heart to love you, not the way you want me to. We've all been in those relationships that you knew the other person probably was just too good for you. You didn't feel you had enough for them, so you let them go, and maybe you regret that. But James Ingram, what a philosopher. Rest in peace. And when we come back again, we're going to talk to James Garcia. Did you see the Fyre documentary, Vanessa? Fyre Festival.
Oh, that was really funny, actually.
Have you watched it?
I saw parts of it. The memes itself that are generated.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, the obvious.
Are
yes.
absolutely hilarious.
Okay, so
but people should definitely.
Oh, no doubt.
Check
I had my wife watch it this morning. I said, you got to watch it. You got to watch it.
What a scam, man.
What a scam. You talk about privilege. But we'll talk more about that when we come back, and we'll give James a call. Thank you all for you listening to 106.5 M WPPM Radio.
Your face is beaming. You say it's 'cause you're dreaming of how good it's going to be. You say you've been around, and now you finally found everything you wanted and needed in me. I don't have the heart to hurt you. It's the last thing I wanna do, but I don't have the heart to love you.
To wrap up the Stacking 20 segment of Ray's Talk Show, before we get to our interview with James Garcia, I did want to briefly touch on the other candidates since we've talked about 2020 politics that have entered the race. Of course, besides Howard Schultz, several Democrats have actually stepped in, including Julian Castro, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, apparently Tulsi Gabbard, that's unclear, and Fort Wayne, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Quickly, so far, so good. The Democratic field, with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, has come out the gate pretty strong. I think in the case of Castro and Warren, have pretty much come out as expected. Nothing has happened early so far to sort of change their position in the race. We knew former HUD Secretary and Mayor of San Antonio, Julian Castro, is going to be a major underdog, certainly not in the tier of some of the major candidates. Has a strong story. I think the symbolism of him making his first campaign appearance on the island of Puerto Rico and making the issues of the island a notable, if not central campaign issue in the Democratic field is important. And Julian is who he is. Really good guy, excellent personal story, public servant, very likable, and obviously he's going to have a special significance to the Latino community nationally, but in particular in Texas and the Southwest. And the fact that California and Texas are sort of inched up on the primary calendar give the Latino electorate in that part of the country more say in the primary. So, steady as she goes, similar to Senator Warren. She has come out the gates as will be expected, strong. She's obviously already a national political figure and very much an icon in the progressive movement of this country. I personally wish she had run in 2016, but nevertheless, coming out fairly strong at the gate. But the question remains to be seen if Senator Warren would be able to expand her to voters that are not part of her traditional economic progressive base. But she's come out strong, as expected. Speaking of coming out strong, California Senator Kamala Harris has come out, I think, stronger than I initially expected. I'll be honest with you. The media perception, anyway, of her coming out. She's been seen as very formidable and probably is seen by the mainstream media anyway as the strongest debut of any of the candidates that have announced over the last month or so. Kamala, in many ways, in many ways, if I had to put an analogy on it, I think of all the candidates that eventually will declare. If you gave them powers like we do with video game characters, whether it's a sports game or one of those shooting games, if you gave them powers, I think from a powers grade perspective, Senator Harris will probably be the strongest across the board in terms of her profile, in terms of her communication skills, in terms of her message. The question remains, will she be able to put that together to really connect with the, not only sort of from a messaging perspective, but also just on a, sort of field campaign perspective in the trenches with her team. But she's certainly a formidable candidate. Going to be very interesting to see how the coalition she's going to want to put together between the progressive community, voters of color, and, people attracted to her profile and her message, the balance of being progressive and having a criminal justice background is going to be fascinating. So, and Pete Buttigieg, let me tell you, the mayor of Fort Wayne, Indiana, obviously not one of the favorites, would, I believe, be the first openly gay candidate for a major presidential party. You heard it here first. Pete Buttigieg, obviously, is a long shot, but Mayor Buttigieg is someone that's going to come out of this campaign cycle, I think, very favorable and coming off, frankly, as an attractive candidate, attractive political figure going into, regardless of where he finishes up. If he gets the opportunity for people to hear from him, I think people are going to like what they hear in terms of his approach to politics and his vision. The question will be, will his youth and will the media and his fundraising capability allow him the opportunity for people to give him a full listen? So, but take my word for it. Like I said, you're going to, whatever you think is going to happen, if you think you want to know what's going to happen in 6 months, you listen to your boy Ray, and he's going to break it down for you as always. And let me tell you something. Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman from Hawaii, someone that has a very scatterbrained political profile. Especially if you look at her history. I don't know, Tulsi. First of all, regardless of how I may feel about where your views are and your personal history, your political history, I don't care about your personal life, that, the fact that you say on national television, I'm going to announce in a week formally, and it's been, I think, 3, that's a little shady. And then particularly your relationship with the Syrian President Assad, there's a lot of questions, a lot of questions. Obviously, some of her views on social issues have changed, 180 over the years, and there's a lot to unpack there. But Tulsi obviously has a message and can be a very attractive political figure for lots of reasons. So we'll see. Interesting how people have come out the gate. We'll see how the killer bees, the Bidens, the Bernies, the Betos, Sherrod Brown, others. Well, my man Garcia announced. I mean, there's still some other dominoes to fall, and we'll keep following them, analyzing them, giving you our perspective here on the Stacking 20 segment of Ray's Talk Show. Let's take a break and hear from our homie James Garcia after we get back. This is to WPPM LP Philadelphia, People Power Media. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, we appreciate those listening on the podcast, our Ray's Latino Talk podcast listeners. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, I'm here with my co-host for today and the executive producer of the show, Vanessa Maria Graber. Vanessa, we're really honored to, in this Keeping It Real mode here. It's too cold here, so we had to find one of the few people in the country that's actually not in an icebox right now. So we're proud to have on the line the editor-in-chief of Vanguardia, Arizona.com, and a great friend to the show, James Garcia. James, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. And you're right, it's not cold here at all. Something like 72 this afternoon. So it's a nice, lovely, sunny day.
Your initial thoughts when you heard Tom Brokaw's comments?
Well, I guess my initial thoughts, I listened to him say that line, and my initial impression was that I was a little stunned because it's Tom Brokaw, and I had always thought of him as a sort of reasonable and reasonably informed person, and I suspect that's still true. But I was a little stunned because it obviously just speaks to a kind of pervasive ignorance in America about Latinos in general. I've had this conversation many times with folks about how so much of what community leaders, politicos, whomever it is, business leaders, so much of what they don't know about Latinos has to do with the fact that they rarely, if ever, interact with Latinos. And I think, of course, when you do that, then you never get the first-person, real-time impression of what our community is like and the diversity of it and who we are. And so you depend on, the crutches, the stereotypes. And that's exactly what he was doing. He had it in his head that somehow Latinos don't want to learn English. And, of course, there's nothing further from the truth when you look at the actual research and documentation.
And James, and it does, and we were talking about it earlier in the show, it really speaks to the fact that what this border debate really is about. And it really is about this uncomfort. And he talked about it on the show, and I've argued on social media, the worst thing he said was the first thing he said, which was he knows people in his personal network that are basically concerned about having brown grandchildren as babies. And, the further integration of Latinos, particularly with, white people. And so, is it, we can't win here. When we're here, when we get here, we're not supposed to be here. When we've already been here, we're not being American enough. When we become American enough and suitable for your children to marry, then there's a problem with that. So, what is the debate here? I'm confused.
Go ahead.
No, and I'm simply asking, it really boils down to this illness of racism, because it seems like whatever form we are presented is a problem.
Yeah, I wrote recently, I've been writing columns every other week, and in that piece I talked about how racism is actually relative. And of course, what I mean by that is that there can be people who are racially biased and prejudiced and carry some big bigotry, and there's all sorts of shades of it. They may not necessarily want to lynch you, but they might not want you to date their daughter. There's all these sorts of levels and gradations, right? And some of it, sometimes there's people like, I think in this case, Tom Brokaw, who, in a weird way, in terms of his comments, he was sort of trying to be nice, right? He was trying to be sort of progressive thinking and open-minded, and yet he kept sort of stumbling over his own stereotypes, his own ignorance on this subject. And, of course, it came off exactly, the way it did. The idea that he knows people who don't want to have brown grandchildren. Well, I'm sure he knows a lot of those folks, because probably most of the folks he knows are white males, and a lot of those white males, I'm sure, are running in those circles, where they either express it openly or at least let it slip that they're not interested in this new wave of immigrants, in this latest wave of immigrants. And of course, the irony is, and I find myself telling people this all the time, even here in Arizona, that, some of us are immigrants. A lot of us, a hell of a lot of us, have been here a hell of a long time, including here in Arizona, when you think about a city like Tucson that was settled in the 1750s, right? So before the Declaration of Independence, right? So it's about educating these folks and sometimes running head-on into the kind of blatant white nationalism or white supremacy that Trump is about. And other times you're sort of at this other end of the spectrum where folks just sort of walk around thinking, I'm being nice to them, I'm being open with them, and yet I'm carrying around these stereotypical views.
Yeah, no, I had a similar comments earlier in the show where, this isn't a casual comment. These are stereotypes, these are comments, these are things that are derived from white supremacist ideology, from nationalist thinking, from xenophobia. And you're right, many of these people don't have friends who are Latino. They don't have business partners, community connections. Like, what they're saying is totally based on BS. It's not informed by anything such as real or lived experience, research, or anything. And so I feel like, again, like, if you don't know, don't say anything at all. Like, why are you even talking about something that you don't know about? You're a journalist. You should know better than to be commenting on things that, he's essentially spreading misinformation, right? Like, what is that comment based on? Have you talked to people that run English as a second language programs, and have you encountered that that's a thing, that people don't want to learn English? Well, if that's not the case, you're literally making stuff up on the air. And in this era of fake news and legitimate journalists such as ourselves trying to defend the integrity of journalism, we have privileged people like Tom Brokaw, again, taking us a step back or two by spreading negative stereotypes and things that are detrimental to our community. And again, these people don't recognize the big platform that they have, and how these little casual statements have much wider implications for the work that we're trying to do and overcome these narratives and these ugly stereotypes to create more positive images of our community.
And that's why it's so important that we have you here, Vanessa, running the show here at Philly Cam and WPPM Radio, Real Community Radio, Real Community Media, and James with your venture at Vanguardia, Arizona. James, share with people what you're covering at Vanguardia, Arizona, and anything you'd like to share about what's happening in Arizona that would be of interest.
Let's say one quick thing about Brokaw before I do that, though. Part of the problem here, too, with Brokaw is that Brokaw's from this sort of mindset that all commentary, all sort of ideologies are in order to be fair and balanced, if I may use that phrase, that somehow they all have a sort of a legitimacy about them. And so even if someone comes on the air on say, his program or wherever, and they sort of spew completely ignorant, baseless information, they should get 3 minutes, because the person who's informed also wants 3 minutes, right? and so part of it is that he's for decades been kind of playing, sort of playing with that kind of journalism, and he's absorbed, that sort of negative stereotype information that comes from the anti-immigrant crowd who doesn't care about the fact, and very often is just simply trying to make the point that these people don't deserve to be Americans, right? And so part of it is that trap, if you will, that journalists let themselves get caught in. So Vanguardia, Arizona, this is a new venture. It's something that I'm starting. What I'm basically doing is a statewide online multimedia magazine that I'm developing as a website, and then ultimately a podcast and some other platforms. And it's going to be covering Arizona Latinos. It's an English language site, but always there's going to be a little Spanglish thrown in here and there. But it's basically, I think, tapping into kind of one of the, that niche in the market that in many ways your podcast, Ray, also does. So the idea that there's a whole audience out there that on some level our community is being pretty well served and has been in the last couple of decades, especially by Spanish language news media. But we also know there's a hunger for news about our community in English.
Well, James, you're definitely going to be a frequent contributor, as you always have been, and a great friend. And my Arizona brother, James Garcia from Vanguardia, Arizona. James, let people know where they can find you and Vanguardia on social media.
Yeah, you can either go to Facebook and just do at Vanguardia, Arizona, and or you can find me at vanguardiaarizona.com. And feel free to drop me an email or a line with any ideas. It's a brand new project that I just launched in December and will be growing in the coming weeks and months.
We did want to get our thoughts into, we referenced it earlier in the show, but about Fyre Festival. I know my Netflix nuts, many of you saw provocative documentary about the ill-fated music festival that was supposed to take place in the Bahamas in spring of 2017, led by hip-hop enigma, troll, Ja Rule, and the visionary, supposedly, Billy McFarland. And, wow, so many emotions. I begged my wife over the week. I said, you got to watch this. This is drama. Incredible. And a lot of her thoughts were similar to mine. I mean, first of all, you just wonder, why did people believe this guy could pull this off? He had no experience doing it. And this glazed look on people's faces when the documentaries were asking, why did you believe, or why did you think, even when you saw it was going down the wrong road, that this could happen? And, well, Billy's vision. Billy's such a great entrepreneur. Great entrepreneurs, people that make a living at bodegas, making 3 cents on items. You give me millions of dollars to throw parties, I could throw a decent party. That's not entrepreneurship. I don't know what that is, but God, we just live in different worlds, don't we? I mean, we're taught, just work hard, go to school, scrimp, scrape, show yourself, be the best, and you'll get a little ahead. And then there's some of us that just have the audacity to just go up to rich people and put on a Banana Republic tight shirt and, just say, hey, I deserve this money. And they get it for some fantastical idea. I mean, I don't know much about throwing those kind of events, but as soon as they got to that island, I said, there's not even hotels there. There's nowhere to sleep. There's nowhere to stay. Where would you take a shower on that little island? And then the Pablo Escobar, well, it was a nonsense. And then, the other point, which my wife brought up, which made a lot of sense, which was, it really speaks to sort of a generational challenge that we have in this modern time, and this influence and the power of the visuals and the lifestyle and the image that is cultivated very carefully on social media and Instagram. And, this idea that there's these young people, these influencers, these celebrities that are living this life that just seems so easy and fun. And if I could just get to them, if I could just touch it, if I could just somehow associate myself with that world, then I could be living large too. And that just isn't reality. And hopefully our young people in this festival, this documentary I know there's 2 of them, one on Hulu, but I haven't seen that one yet. But I hear that one's also good. That'll show people that, how that's just not the way it works. I mean, think about, the sad thing about it, it's a great idea and it's doable, with the right staff and right resources and right work ethic, you could pull off an event like that. And I'm sure someone one day will pull off an event like that in the Caribbean somewhere. Yeah, we have done. I mean, people go to those Freakniks and all. I mean, there's all kind of events that happen in the Caribbean that are maybe not to that scale, but, you can pull these things off in these kind of locations. But you got to put in the work, right? And just thinking about, all the work that's been done that you have to really do to be successful, and the hard work. And I guess as part of our theme here today, that's on some level what's so upsetting and frustrating about Howard Schultz's announcement in this story is that the people that are really successful, that really get things done day in, day out, really know it's about the what you don't see, the preparation, the things that happen when the lights are off and the pictures aren't being taken. I think about this right now, this dream that I've had to take this podcast and take this vision I have to scale, and how a winding road it's been 5.5 years and still nowhere near where I want it to be. But it's Thursday night as I'm recording this segment, close to midnight. I have work in the morning. I have kids to take to school in the morning. There's a Sixer Golden State Warrior game on, which I have the volume off on now. But this is what's going to make it happen. Not fancy pictures. And so that's certainly a lesson we want to get out of it. And, the last nugget is, oh my God, those Bahamian workers, those folks that were just trying to earn an honest living, working hard under some, obviously, doing construction and cooking and hospitality and some very, obviously beautiful locations, but obviously very hot. And, that kind of the kind of landscaping construction that was happening under harried conditions, and how those people got screwed out of their money. And just thinking about, wow, it's amazing how even when these people really didn't have money, they found a way to pay all these other folks tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And nobody was even considerate to say, okay, of the little money we got, at least let's put away a small amount of it, to make sure these servers and construction workers and the restaurant owner who put out $50,000 of her own money for her folks to be to take care of them. And apparently there's been a GoFundMe, I know, for the lady that owns the restaurant, that wonderful Bahamian woman that was such a interesting part of the documentary, to compensate her for the money that was not paid by the Fyre Festival folks. So we got to take care of our workers and take care of our folks that are really doing the work that is often not appreciated. So, and then one day we'll figure out why Ja Rule didn't get any prison time for all this nonsense. But my God, that guy, he just won't go away. So hopefully Billy McFarland will get his. I hear this sentence has now been lessened a year. He's only doing 5 for stealing millions of dollars. Unbelievable. I'm sure I'd only get 5 years if I stole millions of dollars from somebody. And hopefully more justice will be served. and this will be a lesson, lots of lessons for lots of people, and with our working people everywhere in the hospitality industry, especially in the wonderful islands of the Bahamas. Let's get back to the show. Thank you, James. And we're going to, and I want to thank, again, my host and executive director, producer, Vanessa Graber, for joining me today. Yaya will be back next week. And we're going to leave end the show with the late James Ingram's biggest pop hit, which was Somewhere Out There, which was actually the theme song for a movie called American Tail. And for those movie buffs, if you recall, American Tail was about an undocumented immigrant who was a minor and also a rodent. Fievel. But he was also European. So when he got to the United States, he was treated quite well by other immigrants that helped him find his way and ultimately find his family. And he did that duet with a Latina, Linda Ronstadt. So a lot of overlap here. So we're going to end it with Somewhere Out There. Still a tearjerker. Thank you, James. Also, rest in peace. Speaking of music, bachatero Yoscar Sarante also passed away. A lot of our Dominicanos were mourning that loss. So keep enjoying the show. Thank you, James. Thank you, Vanessa. And we'll be back with What's Next and the Raise Latino Talk podcast next week.
It helps to think we're sleeping underneath